Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We were giving you a few minutes to find a parking spot out there. I know we got a lot going on, right? Just coming up here next week. My name is Doug Scaff. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the West Virginia Press Association, and we're really excited to have everyone with us here today. I'm going to do a little housekeeping items. What we do every year is called the Legislative Look Ahead, where we have panelists from different sectors of our government that talk about what to expect in the upcoming 60-day session that starts next Wednesday. Be here before we know it, right, Speaker?
It will. It is.
Housekeeping. You should be able to connect to Wi-Fi without a password. If you need help with that, raise your hand, and the staff here at the Cultural Center will help you out there. We have 3 panels today. First panel, you'll see here to my left. I'll introduce them. But before I do that, I want to recognize a few people. We have an amazing staff at the Press Association. The Press Association, for those of you who don't know, was established back in 1869, right when we were becoming a state, just right around there. Then in 1955, the Articles of Incorporation to really make it what it is today. With over 69 newspapers around the state, we are the voice for the press. Then today, we come together as media. You'll see people from TV, you'll see people from radio, from digital, and of course our newspapers. I did want to give a shout out to our board of directors. We have a few of them with us here today. It's a 9-member board made up of newspapers of all different shapes and sizes from all across the state. I'm going to announce them, just wave to us. I saw Dave Hedges back there from Spencer Newspapers. There he is. Perry Nardo, he was a past president with the Intelligencer and the Wheeling News. Jim McGoldrick, St. Mary's. Jim Spanner was here. He's with Ogden Newspapers. Let's see, Sally C., the Hampshire Review. And who else we have with us today? Scott Refslin will be here as well. We are also streaming this for the first time. So a lot of those of you around the state who couldn't make it in today, this will be streamed on westvirginiapress.org, and it'll also be archived out there so you can go back and write stories for the next few weeks on what you've heard today. So without further ado, we can't do this without our sponsors. I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors. You can see them on the board over there. Big thank you to AARP. Where's Gayleen Miller, our state director back there? Thank you, Gayleen. She's got her volunteer state president, Jane. I saw Jane back there, Jane Marks. The associate state director, Angela Vance. Thank you. Susan LeFew, there she is, the outreach. And Tom Hunter of communication. Let's give AARP a big round of applause for all they do. I saw Dale Witt back there, Vandalia Health. Thank you, Dale. Appreciate you all. The health plan, Jeff Knight up in Wheeling. I think he's watching in right now online. He's the CEO. And Megan Roskovinsky. Big thanks to you'll really thank him at lunchtime, WVU, who will be speaking during lunch. They're one of our lunch sponsors today, West Virginia University, Shauna Johnson. She's here. And not to mention, we have Ashton, and we have some fabulous students that came down from WVU today, from the Reed College of Media and Communications, right? You get the name right? And we also have members of the DA. So thank you all for being here and covering this today. And we can't do this without one of our partners and our former director back there, President Jim Nimitz, and our former director, Don Smith, from the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. Thank you all. Let's give everybody a round of applause. So without further ado, time for me to shut up and turn this over to the main attraction. So we will start with the panel here to my left, and we'll have 3 panels today. What we'll do is each panelist will be able to talk about 5 or 6 minutes, a little overview of what they expect in the upcoming session, and then we turn it over to you all for some questions and answers at the end of each segment after they speak. So I'm going to introduce all 4 of you. As you know here, Roger Hanshaw, Speaker Roger Hanshaw from Clay County. He's been a phenomenal speaker through the years. I had the pleasure of serving with him for a few years. Brings people together, most famous for going across North America and recruiting people, businesses, and opportunities to come back to West Virginia. Speaker Hanshaw, you've done this a few years now? How many years now?
6, I believe.
6. Thank you for your time. Clay Rowley, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. He's here. We have an exciting year coming with maybe a few opportunities. And Clay Rowley's from Harrison County. He's been in the House of Delegates now for 4 years. Our minority leader, Sean Hornbuckle from Cabell County, the proud son of Marshall University. Sean Hornbuckle does a phenomenal job leading the minority caucus in the House of Delegates. And Amy Grady, Senator Grady, thank you very much for Mason County. She is the chair of the Education Committee and on the leadership team in the State Senate. Let's give our 4 panelists a round of applause, and we'll turn it over to Speaker Roger Hanshaw.
Thank you, sir. Friends, good morning. Yesterday, I was admonished that after January 31st, it's poor form to say Happy New Year. But it's the first opportunity that we've had as a legislature to be with you collectively since the beginning of the new year. So I do want to say Happy New Year. And I mean that because it's a time to reflect every year on what's good about our state, what happened over the course of the past year that helped prepare us for where we want to go, and begin thinking about where we want to go when spring comes, when we see the rebirth of nature and rebirth of the state. Our legislative session every year is an opportunity for us to pause and think about how we want to recreate West Virginia. And for many of us, that's been our goal. That's been our objective for the time that we have spent serving as elected officials and members of our legislature, is how do we create a renaissance environment in West Virginia? How do we recreate our economy? How do we re-envision and reimagine the state of West Virginia into a form that makes it the best place in America to live, work, and raise a family? I've said before that that's my priority. That's the guiding principle behind my service as a member of our legislature. It's how do we as a legislature and collectively as a government position West Virginia to be the best place we can possibly make it to live, work, and raise a family. And that has been and will continue to be my principal philosophy behind setting agendas for the House of Delegates and hopefully the broader state government of West Virginia. You know, every year when we reconvene for this forum and plan for the upcoming legislative session, which begins next Wednesday, we pause and reflect on the past year and think about how that impacts where we're headed as we start the legislative session next week. And in 2025, realize this, 2025 will be the first year in the working memory of many of us in the government in which we won't experience the confounding effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Society has now largely moved beyond the impacts of coronavirus, and we've achieved what many of us refer to as a new normal in our economy and in our environment. And for government, for state government in West Virginia, that means an outsized influence on our state budget, because for the last 4 years, we've enjoyed a substantial influx of federal dollars into the state of West Virginia. And that's been beneficial to us in a number of ways. It's allowed us to enjoy some budget surpluses in state government that have positioned us well to make investments in infrastructure, to make investments in public education, to make investments in buying down some of the long-term liabilities of the state of West Virginia, to make investments in the physical assets of state government, of higher education, of K-12 education. Writ large across West Virginia, that infusion of federal dollars, that infusion of cash, positioned us well to do some important things for the state of West Virginia. But where will we be in 2025? Where are we headed now? We know that circumstances are different today than they were even as recently as a month ago, because as we sit here today in the first week of February, we see that things in Washington, D.C. are uncertain. We see that as we see our national economy begin to take shape perhaps in a different way than we've seen over the course of the past 4 years, we know that that will have implications and perhaps broad impact on West Virginia state government. For all of the effort that we have made as a state to transition our economy and grow different sectors of our economy and evolve our economy into more than it's been historically, we still depend in an outsized way on severance taxes from natural resources extracted from West Virginia to drive our economy. When we're proud of that, we're proud of the fact that we continue to be a powerhouse for energy, for mineral resources that power the economy of not just the country but the world. But we don't know what that looks like for us now in the face of a 15% retaliatory tariff imposed on coal imports into China from the United States of America. That remains uncertain to us, and we'll have to see how that evolves over the course of the next budget cycle. But we do recognize it, and we do know that there will be impacts of that, and we know that we haven't seen perhaps even the beginning yet of how our federal budget will shape and influence what we do here in the state of West Virginia. We know that workforce training and public education continue to be a big deal for the state of West Virginia as we think about how we recruit and attract business investment into West Virginia. As Doug said a moment ago, my very favorite part of serving as a member of our government is traveling our country with my colleagues, with Delegate Riley, with Delegate Hornbuckle, formerly with Delegate Scaff, talking about how things in West Virginia have positioned us well to be a destination for investment, how things that we have done here, things that you've helped us do here, have positioned us well to be a place that those outside our borders ought to consider for investment. But we have much more work to do there. We have much more to do in terms of training a workforce, preparing young people to enter the careers of the 21st century economy, because we know that's where we're headed. We can no longer continue to just train workers for the jobs of the past. We have to be training workers for the jobs of the future. And in order to do that, the state of West Virginia has to address some serious liabilities that remain. We know that despite all the good things that we've done over the course of the past decade, we still have challenges and problems of a grand order. We still face a substantial financial burden in our Public Employees Insurance Agency. We have a lot of work to do, perhaps as early as next week, in asking what's the proper structure and what's the proper form for PEIA in West Virginia. So many West Virginians depend upon that insurance plan and that employee benefit to provide basic health care and basic medical coverage for them and their families, that we have an obligation as the state of West Virginia to make sure that those in our charge, our employees at every level of government who depend upon that program to provide health coverage for themselves and their families, are protected and are covered. So it's not lost on us that we have work to do there in terms of how we position West Virginia to remain an attractive place for workers. We want to not only be a good place for third-party investment in West Virginia, we also want to be ourselves a good employer. We want to be an employer that people can be proud of. We want to be a place to work where men and women can build careers that provide for themselves and their families well. So restructuring our PEIA program here in West Virginia is important to us, and shoring it up for long-term success and long-term viability remains a priority. We know that we need to protect our local governments and our state government from insurance liabilities long-term. We've begun to evaluate, with the help of our partners across government, our state's BRIM structure. How do we provide adequate insurance coverage in the face of liabilities that we know exist across state government? We want to be sure we've done that, and we want to make sure that we're dealing with health care cost escalation across the entirety of the economy, not just those employees on our payroll, not just our PEIA members here, but as we think about the cost of health care across the economy, we have work to do in terms of how we structure payments from the state of West Virginia, how we provide coverage to our employees, how we structure health care regulation in West Virginia as well. So each of those are liabilities that we know we're addressing, that we've begun to put in place over the course of our interim process for 2024, leading up to 2025, studies that will result in legislation and items for consideration when we gavel into session next Wednesday. The governor, during his inaugural address last month, called for doubling down on increasing and retaining top talent in our teacher ranks in West Virginia. He suggested that perhaps it's time for another teacher pay raise here in West Virginia. As the husband of a public school teacher, I've no problem supporting that at all. But I know, and we all know, that we have to remain competitive with other jurisdictions. We have, as a state in which 58% of all West Virginians live in a county that touches another state, we have and we experience an outsized influence from things that happen and decisions that are made in bordering states and bordering jurisdictions. So we always have to be cognizant of that. We want to follow the governor's lead on what he intends to do there. We, as the legislature, have spent part of our interim process over 2024 looking at our school aid formula, our school funding formula. As you know, in West Virginia, K through 12 education is funded largely by a mathematical formula. We, as the state of West Virginia, allocate state funding to county boards of education and county school systems in a very formulaic way, in a very mathematical way. But sadly, that formula hasn't perhaps evolved with time to reflect the current state of circumstances in West Virginia. As the contours of public education have evolved over the past number of decades, as society has evolved, and as the needs of children and the needs of parents and families and the school systems that serve them have evolved, perhaps we haven't evolved our school funding formula to reflect the kind of needs that students and parents and their county school systems have to provide the needs that they experience. We want to look at that this year. We want to ask critical questions about what the needs are for county boards of education. what the needs are for students, what the needs are for parents and their families. That remains a top priority for the House of Delegates this year as we think about where we go in the 2025 regular session. Likewise, the governor called in his inaugural address for doubling down by the state of West Virginia on the data economy. And we know that in bordering jurisdictions, the proliferation and expansion of the data center environment and the data center sector of our economy has totally transitioned portions of the economy of other states, to the point that other states have begun to say enough is enough. We no longer want that sector of our economy to grow. In West Virginia, we believe that we're well positioned for that industry. We believe that as a leader in energy and as a historical energy provider and a historical energy exporter, we believe we're well positioned to offer a very hospitable environment for energy-intensive industries here. And as we bring on additional energy-intensive energy users to West Virginia, that does nothing but lower the overall rate base for our residential customers. So we're excited about the opportunities that the governor called out in his inaugural address to work with that industry. We've had a number of very productive conversations over our interim period, and I think you can expect to see the House of Delegates and the Senate and the governor moving collectively in a direction in the 2025 regular session that will position us well to become a leader in the next wave of development of the data economy. We have lots of other needs in terms of how we grow our workforce, in terms of how we position ourselves for education, how we position ourselves for health care. I'll turn this over to my colleague now, Doug Riley, to pick up where I've left off.
Well, thank you. I think Speaker Hanshaw covered a lot of that. But thank you all for having me here this morning. And as the Speaker said and referenced in his comments, you know, things are different. And they are going to require a little bit different approach. And I think some of you have heard that we are making some slight modification to the process on the House side of how we investigate the issues and the problems that we're trying to solve. They get a little bit deeper to the foundational solutions so that we can begin to look at the foster care issues and what are really the root causes and how can we begin to unwind that issue because it's a very complex issue. Similarly, when you start talking about energy and infrastructure, and one thing I can tell you from every committee that we've heard is that workforce development is really a critical issue. So while the session may be starting next Wednesday, our committees have been hard at work. And one of the things about the committee process of why I'm so excited is that we have seen success over the interim. I referenced foster care earlier, and I know that there has been a number of stories written about it and a number of committee hearings during the interim sessions about whether it's the child placing rate or whether it's the clothing voucher program, things that begin to chip away at solving that problem. And so when you go into the House this year, for many of you that know, it'll be a modified process of will there be a bill hearing so that you can take in-depth testimony. In addition, it allows more public input. So previously you would have a 1-hour public hearing where now every bill will have a hearing. So every member of the state of West Virginia, every citizen of the state of West Virginia can submit written comments if they are interested. When a bill comes on an agenda, they can look at it, they can read it, they can understand it, they can put their opinion in. So the process was really modified because we have to do things differently to get to the root cause and allow for more input. So the speaker also referenced the data centers. So we do have a great opportunity there. There are a number of companies who are looking to locate here with our energy resources. I think our regulatory environment and government efficiency. So you heard the governor during his inauguration say that he's looking to have the most transparent, efficient government in the United States. I think you will see our Government Organization Committee look to how can we more efficiently process permits? How can we reduce the red tape but still protect the environment, still make sure that everything is safe, and still make sure that we're delivering the services for the citizens of West Virginia, but in a more efficient, more effective pace. I think our Judiciary Committee will continue to look at corrections to make sure that we're taking care of those who are incarcerated so that we can get them back into society and functional members of society. I think you'll continue to see an economic diversification approach from the Finance Department, our Finance Committee, looking at what is that regulatory structure for taxes and how are those funds really coming in, and where are we generating the revenues, whether it's business inventory or whether it's the taxation rate. I think that the committees are really taking a hard look at how do we get down to the root cause and the root problems to solve those issues. So I think our education committee, which I'm sure Senator Grady will speak on greatly, will look at how do the local school boards and the state school boards, how are they being effective, and where can we help improve them, and how can we have more accountability. I think one thing you'll see from the House as we move into session is accountability for delivering those services to the citizens of West Virginia as needed. So with that, I thank you, and we'll turn it over to Delegate Hornbuckle.
Good morning, friends and new friends. I'm the lucky guy that gets to go after Roger and Clay. So that should be fun, I guess. Thanks, Gaff. Being the minority leader, proud of our caucus, but I'm proud of the state of West Virginia. And I would like to talk about, really briefly, Mark Twain. Because the elephant in the room is that, well, minority leader, what are you going to do with 9 folks? As we know, we don't really get the opportunity, at least in the past, to shape policy, right, with 9 folks. But it's about what we do. And Mark Twain once said, it is not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight in the dog, right? All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to stand up for West Virginia. That's what we're going to do time and time again. We're going to lead by leadership. We want to make sure that we are always working in a bipartisan manner. But when it comes time to be the adult in the room and to stand up to extremism, that's what we're going to do. That's what we have to do. Another thing that we got to start healing West Virginia. I'll take a look to my left. I want to get to know Senator Grady. I'm getting to know Speaker Hanshaw better. And Delegate Clay Riley, it's a personal friend of mine. We talk about each other's sons. We share stories. What we're missing right now in American government in West Virginia is civility. It's statesmanship. We're living in an era of a zero-sum mentality where there's one point. If it's on your side or your side, who wins? That's dangerous for all of us. That is dangerous for all of us. And that's what we have to stand up against. Again, once we work in a bipartisan manner to get things done, but also stand up against radical far-right extremism. That's what we're going to do. The first thing that we're going to do as a caucus is we're going to focus on people. We've heard time and time again about affordable housing, affordable health care. We have worked awfully hard to make sure that everybody in nook and cranny and holler in West Virginia has broadband. We've got to accelerate those efforts. That is wildly important to us as a Democrat caucus. We want to make sure that we are supporting child care. That was one of the big items last session, and we didn't get to do it in the robust manner that we wanted to do. And speaking about my colleagues to my left, we also want to work as much as we can with Governor Morrisey. And one of the things that he said in his first press conference is that he didn't want to be an outlier anymore. He didn't want to be an outlier. Well, I hear you loud and clear, Governor, and we don't either. And we know that our surrounding states, they are spending more on public education than us and yielding better results. So to not be an outlier, we've got to spend more in public education. We've got to make sure that those resources are being spent efficiently. Our teachers are paid less than every single surrounding state. Our bus drivers are paid less than every single surrounding state. Want to talk about compromise? We have the Hope Scholarship, right? Now, I've been on record of not voting for that, but I understand it's here, right? Well, the least we could do is make sure that your taxpayer dollars stay in this state. Currently, they're going out of state. That needs to go to West Virginians. That's what we're going to stand up for here in the great state of West Virginia. We want to be able to help our senior citizens. When it comes to paychecks, we're all about paychecks in the Democrat Party, right? We want to make sure that there are meaningful tax cuts to the middle and low income class. as my colleague to the left, Speaker Hanshaw, said before, I had the opportunity to travel America with them to generate business and bring that in. And we want to make sure that we are creating more opportunities for West Virginians first. We want to make sure that West Virginians first gets the opportunities for those jobs. And lastly, privacy. Really, really big for us, privacy. We want to make sure as women of the great state of West Virginia, whatever you do with your body is your choice. And in West Virginia, we're sportsmen. As long as you're a law-abiding citizen, have whatever gun you want in your home. That's your business. When it comes to loving who you want to love, we want to make sure that stays in your home, because again, that's your business, and we're about privacy. And so we know we have a lot of issues. State budget coming up. Some of the outlying numbers don't look as well. And so we will need to figure out some revenue measures to take care of that. And so if we keep those things at the forefront of our mind, I believe that we can work collaboratively for the betterment of all West Virginians. And now I'll pass it off to Senator Grady.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. So I am chair of education, but many of you also probably know, and some of you may not know, that I'm also a public school teacher. So when I was invited to speak here today, obviously the number one thing that I want to talk about is education. That's the world I live in. That's what I'm always looking at. It's the foundation of everything that begins in our state. Our students, K-12, and our post-secondary students. And I'm not talking about education. When I'm talking about education, I'm not separating school choice or private schools and using the Hope Scholarship for homeschooling versus public schools. I'm talking about all of education. We need to focus on all of our students. There are some things that, as education chair, that are priorities for me this session, priorities for our committee. I've spoken also with the House Education Chair and Vice Chairs, and we've got some ideas that are the same. So I want to tell some of you guys about those a little bit today. Just a few things. I know Speaker Hanshaw spoke about the Public School Support Plan, our state aid formula. That is a #1 priority. That is an antiquated formula that we are seeing is probably not working the best that it can. I was really shocked to find out that there has never been a study done on the effectiveness of our state aid formula. And it hasn't been changed a lot since the early 1990s. Now, that's a long time ago. And the needs of our schools are so different now than they were then. Right? We have a lot more mental health issues. We have a lot of low SES students. We have a lot more students with IEPs. And those aren't addressed in our state aid formula right now. We also have some positions within our school systems that are required by law, but they also are not included in our state aid formula. So we've really got to take a look at that. I've been looking at that for over a year now, and I'm a natural optimist. And I always say that's a blessing and a curse. So I went into that thinking, we're going to come up with something, we're going to change this is going to be great. And I realized really quickly, it's a 7-step formula that has about 85 sub-steps. And so that's an exaggeration, of course, but it felt that way. And so I quickly took a step back and started thinking, if we change one thing, it's like a domino effect. It changes another. And that's how that's set up. It's not very transparent. It's hard to understand. And I actually had to I called her my tutor that used to work at the Department of Education, knew the state aid formula like the back of her hand. I invited her to my office to sit down and explain everything to me so I could understand it wholeheartedly. And I still don't understand all of it completely, but I have a better grasp of it. But when I started looking at what we could change, I started getting really nervous, thinking if we change this and it causes another change, what's going to happen? And the last thing that we want to do with that state aid formula is to do a guess and check or a trial by error to where let's see if this happens. We don't want to do it, right? We want something that's going to be perfect. And I'm not certain that we can get there, but that's the goal. So that is a priority for this session. I don't know if we'll have a bill to come out exactly. At the very least, I think we do need an outside agency or an outside firm to come in and give us a study, to give us some data-driven evidence to show what we need to change. Is it effective? Are we getting the outcomes that we expect based on the way we are funding our schools? I think that's really important. The second thing I think many of you probably remember from last year, we focused on a school discipline bill, Senate Bill 614. That's still a priority of mine. I'm not going to stand up here in line and say I wasn't disappointed when that bill didn't pass last year. I know it wasn't perfect by no means, but I was disappointed that it didn't pass. But I'll tell you what, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And so I was really disappointed, but some really great conversations have come out over the last year about that bill because of the exposure that it had. And it didn't pass, but I have been contacted by several mental health providers, mental health agencies that work with other school systems in other states that have contacted me and said, how can we help? Superintendent Blatt and I have been on phone calls with different organizations to see what we can do to help our students in our state. Some of them involving telemedicine, telehealth services, and that's something I didn't really think about, but if we can get some sort of support for our kids in schools to where we can keep them in schools, but also focus on, the majority of the kids, the 99% that are in the classroom to learn, I think that's the best thing we can do. But so that's also a priority. That bill will be reintroduced this year. I don't know what it'll come out as exactly, but the focus is more on how can we help provide those alternative learning centers or mental health supports within our schools. Okay, the next thing is a priority is the school safety, security, and mapping. So the Department of Protective Services, I've been working with them on coming up with a plan for all 55 counties for them to design a security map for every single school in our state. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with those, but those security maps are amazing that the DPS can pull them up and see where there's movement inside of a building. They can see where doors are, where AEDs are, where every single different fire extinguishers, where they can shut off gas valves, water leaks, different types of things that aren't deemed emergencies but are helpful in the case of an emergency. That's going to have a little price tag on it, but I think in the long run it's something that we have to really consider and think about how important is the safety of our students, right? And so I think it's a big thing. It's about $4.8 million for the whole state, and I think that's a good investment. That's the third thing. A couple of other things just to touch on really quickly is Speaker Henshaw talked about our revamping our high school experience, right? So I've been kind of discussing with other states how they have changed their requirements for their diploma. So we would all be sitting here thinking, everybody in this room probably has a high school diploma. Everybody's experience was different. And our high school diploma does not have the same exact value that it had at one point in time. And part of that is because we are graduating students who are reading on a third grade level or a fourth grade level. Part of that is because we are just pushing kids through the system, and it's not a fun thing to talk about, but it's the truth. And so how can we make our diploma have more credentials of value and make our diploma back to where it's worth something? And so that's another focus. And the last thing I want to talk about, and this may not require legislation, but it's something we've been really working hard together with some businesses and the Department of Education on, are some business and school partnerships. Getting our students trained for workforce outside of the school system. There are some states that do this really well, where they have their businesses in the community come in to their schools and do like in-school internships pretty much to train kids while they're in school, and then they have a job as soon as they get out. I think it's really important that our businesses take an interest in our students in our school systems, and that can make a big difference in our workforce. But with that, that's all I'm going to talk about today. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I think that's the cue for us now, isn't it? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. So we will turn it over. The questions answer. I have Stella over here. We'll come around with a mic, and if you would, just state your name and the organization you're representing, and we'll start with Stephen Adams.
Yeah, Steve Adams of Ogden Newspapers. I know we're going to get into some policy questions, but I do have a process question. I wish the president was here, because the president would be able to probably better answer this, and I don't expect the speaker to speak for the president, but I know you've had conversations, I'm sure, with the president in regards to this new process for your bills, for the committees, and how that's going to work on the House side. I'm curious to know whether you've had any conversations with how that's going to work once the Senate starts sending bills over, because it seems to me, since it's a new process, everyone has to learn it on the House side. Senators are going to have to get used to that new process as well, and it seems like the closer we get to the end of session, that could maybe have some issues, as everyone's learning that process. So what conversations have you had with your counterpart on the Senate side for how that new process is going to work in regards for Senate bills and making sure everybody's bills that are priorities get across the finish line?
Sure, I'll talk about that. Let me just talk about it philosophically for a moment, and then I'll give credit where credit's due. Delegate Riley did a lot of work in helping us actually hold the pen and craft the process. The goal we had here, and that we still have, is that we gauge ourselves and gauge our success less on quantity of legislation passed and begin to look more at quality of legislation passed and the extent to which we've actually solved a problem. And we know that sometimes that requires a bill. Sometimes that requires that we actually change West Virginia code. And when it requires a change in West Virginia code to solve a problem, we'll change it. And if we need to pass more bills to do that, then we'll pass more bills to do that. But sometimes we know that all we have to do is call up an agency and have an agency come before us and talk about why they do what they do, rather than pass a bill to compel them to do something that might not even be possible. We need to just talk to people. And that's what we've done so far. So the president and I have spoken, for sure. I will not speak for him today. That's not my place. I will tell you, though, having been a staff lawyer at one point for the Senate, it's a very different body of 34 than of 100. It just requires a fundamentally different structure to manage a body almost three times as large. But in terms of to specifically address your question, Steve, with respect to will it bog the process down, we don't think so. We've built enough fail-safes and backstops into the process to deal with any kind of exigent circumstances. When exigent circumstances arise, for those who've been here in years past, it's possible under the rules of both bodies to introduce a bill at 11 o'clock, pass it by 1 o'clock, have it signed by the governor at 4:30. When that's what the situation calls for, that's possible.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add to that, Steve, is we are changing a little bit of the policy so that we make sure that the senators know their bills are actually going to be on the agenda, to give them that opportunity. We think it will actually improve the relationship with the senators, because if they know it's on, they can come, if they want, to explain it, to really try to get an understanding of what problem they're trying to solve, so that you're not assuming what the issue is. So I think that it ultimately, in the end, will provide a better process and a better relationship with the senators, and I don't think it'll bog it down at all.
Go right here, Stella. Go ahead.
Eric Douglas with West Virginia Public Broadcasting. We've heard, or we're hearing, that the White House is looking to take apart the Department of Education, for lack of a better term. West Virginia depends on a lot of money coming from the federal government for our education system. Senator Grady, Speaker Hanshaw, how do we make up for that funding if it suddenly disappears?
Thank you for your question. I think we need to look at exactly what's happening there. That whole, we're hearing a lot about dismantling of the Department of Education, doesn't mean the funding is going away. So what that means is that the funding is not going through the U.S. Department of Education, but will come directly to the states. And so, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it personally. Honestly, I'd like to see how it's going to play out. But I don't really see a problem with the money coming directly to the states, to the State Department, to decide how that could be spent on our West Virginia schools, because this is the reason. As a teacher, we get federal money. I teach at a low-income school, Title I school, so we have federal funds that come to us with a lot of red tape. A lot of red tape. You can spend it on certain things, but you can't spend it on other things. If there are certain things that I possibly need in the classroom, that money can't be used for it, right? So if we could get rid of that red tape, I'm all for it. With our Title I funds that are federal money, at the end of the year, we always have a meeting at our school, and we sit down and say, this is how much is left, and this is what we need to spend by a certain date. If we don't spend it, it goes back to the federal Department of Education. So a lot of times there's a lot of wasteful spending, because who wants to send money back, right? So you start buying things that you don't necessarily need because it has to be within the red tape. And I think it could be a really good thing if the states can control the funding and how we can spend it, because who knows our state better? The U.S. Department of Education or the West Virginia Department of Education? So I think that's where I stand on it. Thank you for your question.
Okay. Back there.
Hi, Erin Beck, Mountain State Spotlight. My question is for Delegate Riley, because you mentioned foster care. Okay, so you mentioned like the legislative work group and some efforts like to kind of chip away at the problem. But we all know there are substantial changes and reforms that need to be made to the system. We still know we don't have enough CPS workers. We know we need more supports for families and kids that have been traumatized or are experiencing poverty that can sometimes lead to neglect cases. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about things that we could maybe expect so we aren't just chipping away at the problem.
Yeah, I can go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So a couple people who have been working that over the summer through the interims, one of them is Delegate Burkhammer, who is a foster care parent himself. So he's really invested a lot of time into understanding those issues, working with the agencies, understanding how they're approaching it. So when you talk about little things like, it sounds like a little thing, but a clothing voucher and making sure that process works, that's not a little thing. It sounds like something little, but when someone shows up with just one pair of clothes, like that is not a little thing. It's something very significant. So understanding how one thing, and I think Senator Grady referenced it with the funding formula, one thing leads to the next, leads to the next. So whether it's the placement rates and how quickly we can get them in, whether it's the kinship and how judges look at it of whether the kinship care, or whether it's the clothing voucher program to make sure that they're actually doing it, and looking at the data and the statistics to make sure that we are achieving the goals. So what I think you will see is a lot of hearings of the agency to really try to understand, okay, how does this impact the next process? How do we then begin to solve the tertiary issue that follows with that? So when I talk about that issue, there is no one single silver bullet. So it's going to take time and process, and I think ultimately what you'll see is you'll see some legislation come out, but then you will see that carry on into the interims so that you now have a subcommittee or a committee who has really deep understanding of the process and the challenges so that they can work on it in the off season and not just start and stop and start and stop. So that was the intent of it, and that's where I think we'll see significant improvement.
May I add to that? I think there's maybe not a better example than Aaron's question, which is a good one, to illustrate Steve's point, which is that sometimes problems that we face as a state can't be solved with a statutory change. Sometimes the things that we, the people of West Virginia, need our government to do don't just require us to change West Virginia Code 1931 as amended. This is one of those, because I'm headed into my 11th legislative session. Delegate Hornbuckle and I came here together in 2015. And I think we've passed at least 3 substantial pieces of legislation that many of us at the time said, this is it. This will take care of the foster care problem in West Virginia. Only to find that the executive couldn't implement the policy as we had drafted it, or only to find that the judiciary chose to handle placement of young people differently than perhaps we had envisioned in the statute. We need to spend a whole lot more time talking. We need to, and I don't mean that as a delay tactic. I mean, we just need to spend a lot more time talking. Why, executive branch, why couldn't you implement the bill as we wrote it? Judiciary, why aren't you placing children the way we said we wanted you to place them? And sometimes that might just require the executive branch to implement what we passed differently, or it may just require that we understand better why the judiciary is making the decisions that they're making based upon a constitutional principle that we can't change in statute. That question, Aaron's question, is so important because it illustrates what we're actually about trying to solve now, which is the problem, not passing another bill. We'll pass all the bills we need to pass, but we want to solve the problem.
Hi, Ellie Heffernan, Black by God, the West Virginian. I just had a clarifying question about the rule changes. Delegate Riley, you said that previously any member of the public could request a public hearing, and I thought I heard you say that now all bills will have opportunities for public hearing, was how you phrased it. Do you mean submitting of written testimony?
All bills will have a bill hearing. Every House bill that comes out will have a bill hearing, which is intended to take testimony, which is intended to allow for public comment, allow for written comment. So there will be a process for written comments to be submitted.
But yes. Not verbal comment?
They can request to be, yeah, there would be a request to be placed on an agenda or unanimous consent. So there will be opportunities to have a bill hearing, but this furthers the input for whether it's written previously, which was not part of the rules.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go over here for. Here.
Alex Tejada, 13 News. Some of our southern counties are facing problems with basic needs such as clean water or even accessing a grocery store. Is there anything the legislature believes it can do to help this persistent poverty?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I am one of those counties. Okay, so to be clear, I live at Walbach. I live in Clay County, 34 miles north of here. The major grocery store, the last major grocery store we had closed down 4 or 5 years ago. That grocery store today is home to a gymnastics facility. So I shop at the Elkview Kroger on exit 9 on the way home from my job here in Charleston in the evenings. That same set of facts and same set of circumstances is real in lots of our counties, particularly our southern counties where the major employer was a coal mine. When that coal mine closed down, the implications of that ripple all the way through our community. My family owned a hardware store for a time in Clay, and I could look at the sales data from that store and tell you the day that the coal mine closed, the literal day that the coal mine closed, because sales fell off that quickly. There are things we can do, and it begins with infrastructure. It begins with us putting more money into resources that provide clean water, sewer systems, adequate broadband, good roads, because the future of economic development in many of our small counties is small business organic growth from the local community. But that requires, it absolutely compels action by local partners. So we cannot, we as the state cannot just look for all solutions to emanate from Charleston. The Golden Dome of the state capitol building is beautiful, but it isn't the solution to every problem. Many of our problems require local communities to begin the process. We want to step in and help, and we're committed to doing that. We've put hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure over the course of the past decade, and all 4 of us sitting here have been happy to cast those votes, and we'll do them again, because those bills are important to local communities. Those dollars are important to the success of local economic development projects. But just as important is the motivation by local county commissions, local town councils, mayors, and county commissioners to embrace solutions locally. And we need them to not just look to Charleston for the answer. It has to be a symbiotic relationship.
I just want to really quick to echo what the speaker said. That is something that he said we share in a lot of our counties. And I know we've had grocery store issues down in Cabell County, things of that nature, surrounding places, Wayne, Lincoln, with clean water. And I think some good things could come about this new process, which will allow us to prioritize things with the infrastructure needs that we have, but it also comes back to the common theme of working together. As the speaker talked about with the state, the counties, and municipalities, if we do this, I think those things will be achieved.
Hello, Katie Coyne, West Virginia Watch. Hi. Speaker Hanshaw, you mentioned, tariffs. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like or the impact on West Virginia. This is going to be a big budget session based on what the governor has said. We have this alleged deficit that we're looking down. How are we going to make a budget, and a responsible budget, which I think is what you all want, when we have so many uncertainties on the federal level right now? And I'm not just talking about, the one-time COVID funds expiring, but potential federal grants being pulled, the tariffs, like you mentioned. There's a lot up in the air. Yeah,
there is, and I think there likely is going to be for the next several months. So I'll let Delegate Riley, who helps lead our finance committee now and has been a leader even without the title for the past 4 years, respond in just a moment as well. But we're in a place where I'm pretty proud of the way we have budgeted, not just the actual budget document itself each of the past 4 years, but the manner in which we've arrived at it. And that is that we've held one-time investment of dollars to infrastructure. We've held the distribution of one-time money, particularly the COVID funds, to either capital investment or paying down of one-time expenses. So we have not used those funds to do, as is often said, build the base budget. We've not done that. And the way in which we've not done that is to move a lot of those expenses into what we typically colloquially refer to as the surplus section of the budget. You'll hear people call it a back of the budget item from time to time. That's the manner in which we've done it. And as a result of that, our actual hard dollar expenses, the obligations of the state that have to be met, have remained a front of the budget obligation, and we've done that very consciously. That's been by design. And as a consequence of that, we don't share the belief that we're in quite the same kind of budgetary situation that others have suggested we are. We think we're in a much more sound position because of the manner in which we have budgeted, rather than looking at the aggregate dollar value spent in each of the last 4 budgets. If you look at the manner in which it was allocated and the actual structure of the document itself, we think we're okay.
Yeah, and I would like to applaud the governor for bringing back the 6-year budget. So in the House Finance, we have continued to look forward to say, what are those future obligations? And as Speaker Hanshaw said, the back of the budget is something we've used for those one-time capital investments. And so when that budget does get presented, the House will take a look at where those, what are the priorities, and where are the priorities that the governor has, where are the priorities that the House has, and where are the priorities that the Senate has. And you'll be able to see what that spending philosophy looks like, and where it's coming, and ultimately what the overall approach to government is, and so that we can work together with Senator Barrett, who's the finance chairman, with Governor Morrisey, and Chairman Chris, who would be here today, had an obligation, because we think that ultimately this will allow us not only to deal with the circumstances today, the good discipline we've had for using the back of the budget, deal with the circumstances we have today, but also what it looks like going forward. So I think that we've been judicious in those investments from a one-time perspective, and I think we'll be okay in the end.
Let's go over here with Mike. Mike?
Thank you. It's Mike Toney from the Gazette-Mail. Thank you for your time. Despite the projected $400 million budget shortfall that Governor Morrisey has touted, he's called for introducing new tax cuts, and that's sparked criticism that that past tax cuts, the 2023 income tax cut, previous business franchise tax phase out, corporate net income tax cut, haven't averted the budget hole that we're apparently in now. Would you be open to, perhaps changing the tax brackets, increasing taxes on higher incomes, say over $100,000, reducing or getting rid of the steam coal severance tax reduction from 6 years ago, or what kind of tax change-ups or tax bracket change-ups are you open to, or perhaps averse to?
Well, thank you. And so just to follow up, when we talked about the priorities and the spending philosophy, that also included some of the past things that we've looked at. So this isn't a new process when we look at what our spending philosophy is and where our priorities. And one of the things you've seen from this legislature is we've prioritized keeping money with the citizens of West Virginia. So when we look at whether we're going to make new investments or, as you suggested, adjustment to tax policy, we'll not only look at going forward, but we're going to want to make sure that we've maintained the philosophical beliefs that we've carried from the past. So I imagine that when we look at it in the future in the House, we will consider how do we maintain money in the pockets of the citizens of West Virginia with providing the adequate resources that we need. So that's one of the reasons why we use the back of the budget, and that's one of the reasons why I think you'll continue to see discussions around where we best spend our funds to provide those resources to the citizens.
And so I think we've got to truly be reimaginative of the tax code and how we're going to approach that. You mentioned the year 2023. Before those last round of tax cuts, in comparison to our surrounding states, we're already #1 overall in business tax climate. And so the question is, why go further, right? And so when we're looking at, I think you brought the number 100,000 or less. We need to be focusing again, and we're going to remain on this, middle and low income families, making sure they have more money in their pockets, and anybody that is outside of our borders, making sure they're paying their fair share. Because we've got to put West Virginians first. It's just that simple. Currently, right now, the top 1% are paying a lot less than the majority of the folks in this room. And we have to make sure that we're doing this in a judicious manner. And if we do that, we'll also be able to fill some of that $400 million budget deficit.
Thank you. Let's go. We have time for, I think,
Tom McClung, WVU News. My question is both for the Speaker and Delegate Hornbuckle. Mr. Speaker, Delegate Hornbuckle, does the House plan to introduce legislation expanding on Governor Morrissey's executive order to eliminate DEI programs in West Virginia?
I've not talked to him about that, so he's not asked us to introduce any kind of legislation to that effect. It's not something he's asked us to do, and at this point, I have no reason to believe that we would.
Everybody was waiting for this one, huh? So first, let's talk about this really quick. Let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. Let's be very clear. DEI is merely to be included in the line. It has never been and will never be about skipping the line. So let's just make sure that fallacy, that false narrative is put out there, because it's a very dangerous boogeyman that is out there. And the senator to my left, Senator Grady, she talked about data-driven evidence. So let's talk about the bookends first. The bookends, when it comes to DEI, at the very top of the scale, the biggest benefactor are white women. And they still currently only make 82% in comparison to their white male counterparts. And I think they are worthy. When we look at the bottom of the chain, it is actually black people, because when it comes to DEI efforts, veterans, Latinos, LGBTQ, they're all above black people, all right? And when we talk about that, still in our state of West Virginia, the median household income is about $32,000. White counterparts, $55,000. When it comes to the unemployment rate for people that are not of color, it's about 4.2%. Black people at 6.8%. So again, it is a fallacy, it's a lie that there's any type of these efforts going on, because those numbers cannot exist. And by the way, when it comes to educational attainment, black people lead the state at over 90% of high school graduates, but yet are not seeing the ROI when it comes to jobs and income. And so again, we have to put the facts out there, because we're on a very dangerous trajectory when we talk about these things, because again, they don't exist and we're not doing anything. And I would also venture to say, again, it's about being diverse and included. West Virginia Forward had studies done by McKinsey & Company, and we believe in that, because the things that we're doing today when it comes to tourism, cybersecurity, we follow that. WVU did great work on that, right? Well, also they say that when companies in our great country have more diverse teams, on average, 35% more likely to have higher returns. And we all like money, right? And so even if you don't like women, people of color, veterans, if you like money, you better make sure that's around. In West Virginia, I'll be honest, I'm a Democrat capitalist. I like money. And we need more of it. And so let's put this boogeyman to bed, and let's start working together. Thank you.
Chris?
Hey, first, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you. Chris Millett from the Gazette-Mail. Speaker Hanshaw, you said we don't share a belief that we're in quite the budgetary situation that others say we are. Are you implying that you don't agree with the governor's $400 million deficit assertions for the next fiscal year?
Well, I just don't know. We'll need to see his budget to know, right? And he'll introduce it to us presumably next Wednesday night at his State of the State address. So until we've seen his budget, we don't have anything to respond to. Our budget analysts and the way in which we've structured our budget each of the last 4 years lead us to believe that we're well positioned for fiscal year 2026. But until we've seen the governor's budget and know the basis of his calculations, we don't have anything to respond to.
Let's go over here still.
Hi, I'm Bailey Parsons. I'm from the Parthenon at Marshall University. My question is for Delegate Hanshaw. you said that there is more work to do for the future employees of our state. And as a college student, I'd just like to know more about what specific plans are going to take precedent this year, about the liabilities that you mentioned for people like me who are unsure about their future in this state.
Sure. So the specific liabilities that I mentioned were the financial liabilities of the state, the things that we know are going to impact our state budget. So we know that absent some structural change to our state's public employees insurance agency, and absent some structural change to our BRIM program, and absent some structural change to the way we deal with Medicaid and some of our state health care obligations, we'll be unable to make the kind of investments that I think we all probably want to make in additional K through 12 education, in additional higher education opportunities, in additional workforce training and job recruitment opportunities to provide new entry-level positions for workers and for college graduates. So the liabilities that I mentioned are important to me, and I think important to my colleagues in the broader House, and I won't speak for the Senate, but we've discussed them in the House, because if we don't address those things, they'll continue to chew up a bigger and bigger and bigger portion of our overall state budget, which will make a smaller and smaller and smaller portion of resources available for us to do things to prepare the economy for new graduates. So that's why those things are important to me, because we want to continue to grow and transition our economy. We want to continue to recruit job opportunities here, to keep students here, to keep young people here, to keep entry-level workers here, and recruit them from elsewhere. But we're not able to do that if we continue to spend more and more and more resources on things that don't have that kind of return on investment. Is that responsive to your question? Okay.
Thank you. I think we got time for one, maybe two more. Let's go.
Journey Sands with the Daily Athenaeum. Are there any specific bills that students at West Virginia University should be looking out for in the upcoming legislative session?
I'll preview one. This is a personal priority of mine. I haven't introduced it yet. This is a Roger Henshaw bill. This is not a bill on behalf of the House. It's not a bill on behalf of House leadership. It's just mine. So I intend to introduce early on in the session the Stimulating Comprehensive Investment in Engineering and Nationally Competitive Industries Act, the Science Act. Took me a while to come up with that acronym, but that's a bill that's a priority of mine, because I want to create the kinds of job opportunities here in West Virginia that new graduates want to pursue. So we do a really good job, I believe, as a state in waiting on someone to knock on the door and say, we're considering the state of West Virginia as a place to come and locate our factory. How can you help us come here, and what can you do for us to incentivize our company to come here and build a factory? I'd like to see us do more to proactively say, we have graduates from our colleges of engineering at Marshall and West Virginia University and WVU Tech. We have students who are pursuing bioengineering at fine institutions here. Let's help them be entrepreneurial. Let's recruit the kind of companies that those graduates that offer jobs those graduates can fill. So I want to be proactive on that and create those kind of opportunities. So there's one.
Thank you. And in the spirit of DEI, we're going to include Marshall University as well, all right, not just for WVU. But I have a bill, again, not on behalf of the House, but a personal bill, and I would love for them to be a part of it, is the Young Professional Tax Credit. So looking at college graduates from the ages of 18 to 40, recognizing what they have direct in student loans, getting a tax credit to help them either stay in the state or come to our state. And also it would expand beyond 40 if you still have loans that you owe. So I think that would help, again, to keep our young talent here and to attract new young talent.
Hi, Esteban Fernandez with the Times West Virginian. So you guys mentioned the role of the federal government in the state economy. Marion County is home to a few government agencies, like we have NOAA and NASA there. We have a supercomputer, actually, in Fairmont. And then next door in Clarksburg, you've got the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division. If anyone's been following the news, I'm sure you've seen that Elon Musk is going through several government agencies and kind of dismantling them. There's that fork in the road email that is kind of pressuring federal employees to quit. If those federal jobs go away, how will the state legislature respond?
Yeah, our first obligation there is making sure that our federal delegation's in step with what we're trying to do here. So that's a conversation that we have almost every day with one or more of our federal counterparts. We certainly will not be in a position to step in and assume all of the financial benefit to those major employers that are a driver of the economy in North Central West Virginia. So our role at this stage in the process is keeping pressure on our federal officials. That's the role that we have to play here. It's not the first time we've been here. We've been in this situation before. It's perhaps more high profile in the state of the current transition in the federal administration, but it's not the first time we've been here. So we've seen this play before. There's been a number of times in which our National Guard Air Wing here in Charleston has been slated for closure. We've had to rally and make sure that our federal officials understood and understand the implications of loss of that facility here for the Kanawha Valley economy. There have been more than one occasions in which our institutions and federal facilities in the Eastern Panhandle have been slated for closure. We've had to rally and do the same thing. We're in that same posture now, and our role as state level officials is working with our federal delegation because we're not in a position to step in and backstop that from a resource perspective.
We're just going to take one last question here since we started a couple minutes late. So we'll do one last question. Thank you.
Wade Sullivan, I'm with the Parthenon at Marshall University. As a state, we are at the bottom, towards the bottom in the country in education. And as a student who required an IEP growing up, went to Title I schools, currently receives funding for having a disability in school, are there any plans if the Department of Education is disbanded to assist students that are, at the bottom tier of, retention and graduation rate?
Thank you for that question. When I was talking about the public support, school support plan and revamping that, it's my thoughts that we should include some funding basically for students with disabilities or low SES students. We need to have schools or counties that have a high number of those types of students receive more funding, and we don't do that currently, really. So that would be one way that I think that we could kind of help with that. And I think your question was more asking along the lines of those students who have IEPs, how can we make sure that as they're going through school they have everything they need, and then when you get to college that you feel successful and you're ready for it, right? And I think it requires more resources whenever you have a student with an IEP or any kind of learning disability, because they need more resources to get on the same level as their peers. And so if they don't have the funding to provide those resources, that's a big step. Like, that's what we have to start with to begin with, and then finding those people that can provide the kind of interventions and things that we need is also another step that we need to make sure. We have to make sure that all of our teachers and our paraprofessionals are all educated and trained to make sure that we can help students with disabilities in the best way possible.
Thank you all for your time. That will conclude this session. Thank you, Speaker Hanshaw, Delegate Rowley, Minority Leader Hornbuckle, and Senator Grady. Let's give them a round of applause. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break as we reset for the next panel. 5 minutes.
Thanks, bud. Thank you very much. You guys feel free to take the copy of the lobby there with you.